let's just go ahead and get started. So welcome to our talk on building healthy and sustainable open source communities. We'll start with a couple of introductions. I am Dawn Foster. I've been in this industry for a very long time. I worked in open source at companies like VMware and Intel, and I'm currently the Director of Data Science for the CHAOSS project. I also have a few other roles, including on the board of Open UK. I'm the co-chair of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation Contributor Strategy Technical Advisory Group, which is quite a mouthful. I also did a PhD a couple of years ago and studied the Linux kernel. Take it away, Peculiar.
Okay, hi everybody. I am Peculiar Umeh. I'm a software developer, an open source advocate, CHAOSS Education Project Manager, and CHAOSS Project Management Co-Chair. Thank you.
I wanted to just quickly start by thanking the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation for funding the CHAOSS Data Science Initiative, along with the Linux Foundation and Ford Foundation, who also provide support for the CHAOSS project. We will start today with a very quick overview of the CHAOSS project, along with some thoughts on how to approach using metrics to improve the sustainability of open source projects. We'll look at health and sustainability across 4 different categories. We'll look at responsiveness, contributor sustainability, organizational participation, and security. And then we'll wrap it up with a few final thoughts. So first, I will turn it over to Peculiar to provide an overview of the CHAOSS project.
Thanks, Dawn. CHAOSS overview. CHAOSS stands for Community Health Analytic for Open Source Software. We are an open source, a Linux Foundation project, globally distributed with over 2,000 members in Slack. CHAOSS is a lovely place to spend your time. We are not focused on mental health. We are not for profit with any specific mandate, and we are not only focused on code contributions. All types of contributions are welcome at CHAOSS. There's so many ways to get started or get engaged with CHAOSS. One of the easiest ways to get started is to find an area of the project that you are passionate about and attend some meetings. In particular, a lot of people start by joining our working groups. I am active within the metrics working group and data science working group, along with OSPO working group. We also have other working groups like UN SDG, Founding, University Open Source, OGO, Science and Research Working Group, and lots more. Our CHAOSS Africa and CHAOSS Asia chapters are very active. If you are reside in those regions, you can join any of them. We have 2 different software projects like OGO and Grimoire Lab that you can use together and analyze your metrics. CHAOSS resources. Within CHAOSS project, we have historically focused on metrics definition and collection of lab that allow you to collect data and visualize those metrics. We have which tend to be used by community managers and others who want to find ways to improve open source projects from within. But lately, we have expanded into consumption metrics to help OSPOs and others understand the viability of the open source project they are consuming. This viability matrix was developed by Bray White from Verizon. For the rest of the presentation, we will talk more about how you can use the information in our practitioner guides to move from data to action. This includes turning the tsunami of open source data into something more manageable that allow you to find a few kiosk metrics to help you get started when improving the health and sustainability of the open source project that you are most important for you and your organization. One of the biggest challenge people face or people have with data is that it is overwhelming. This is especially true when you are looking at metrics for open source projects where all the data is available to gather and analyze. We know that people get overwhelmed by the data, so we created a new practitioner guide series. Each guide focused on a single topic to help you get started, but the real value of these guides isn't just in the data, but in how to take the data you have and use it to make meaningful improvements to your open source project. Too often, I see people measure what is easy to count and understand, like stars and fogs, which doesn't tell you much about the health of your project. Quite a few metrics too, including the ones we have within the kiosk project, display what we can refer to as of wall of metrics. These are pages of visualizations that you can use to understand your open source project, but they require you to know what you are looking at and know where to focus your energy to get the data that you need. We have visualizations for dozens and dozens of metrics, and all of them can be useful, but which one you should focus on depends on what you want to achieve. Ideally, you should be looking at visualizations that help you find areas where you can improve or ways that you can measure whether you are achieving your project goal. The Kiosk project launched this practitioner guide series designed to use by people who may or may not be experts in data analysis or open source to help them understand how to interpret the incoming tsunami of data generated by the open source project with the goal of finding ways to improve the health of those projects. The guides are useful for anyone who wants to better understand project health and to take action on what they learn from the metrics to make their project more sustainable. We have an introduction guide and guides on 4 topics that we will talk about in the few slides, and we also have more guides coming soon. These guides are all MIT licensed, and each guide contains a link to where you can find the guide in our data science working group repository. So you are welcome to fork the repo and customize it to meet the needs of your OSCO or your organization. And of course, we hope people will make suggestions and contributions to make these guides even better over time. Metrics strategies. The introduction guide talks about how there is no one size fit all approach to using metrics to measure project health. Every open source project is a little different. Excuse me. And metrics also
Oh, you're all right to keep going? We lost her. Well, we're almost to my section anyways, so I'm gonna just keep going. So one of the best places to start isn't actually with the metrics, but by spending some time understanding the overall goals for the project And if your organization is driving the project, you should also consider the goals for your organization. By thinking strategically about the overall goals, you'll be in a better place to decide what you need to measure, to decide, to determine whether the project's achieving its goals. So by focusing on the goals, you can develop a metric strategy that helps you focus on the metrics that matter most for you. One key to doing this well is an interpretation of your open source metrics. So the real experts are the people who are involved in the day-to-day work on a project. So you need to collaborate with key people from the project, since they can help you interpret the metrics and any trends that are identified in ways that make sense for that particular project. So when deciding if something's a problem or a concern that needs to be addressed, your contributors can actually help you decide whether the issue might be a temporary fluctuation instead of an actual real problem. Peculiar, do you want to take back over? I kind of just kept going when you dropped off.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. So you need to consider what else is happening in your community, your project, or your ecosystem. Was there a big conference? Maybe a major release, vacation season, especially if you're in Europe in July and August, and other things that impact people's time to actually make contributions to the project. And it can help to overlay these on a graph to understand the impact better. And you might want to wait to see if the metrics rebound on their own, to see if it really is a temporary disruption before you start making a whole bunch of changes within your project that you may or may not actually need. But once you decide that you do need to improve in a particular area, it's important for this step to have buy-in from the community and project leadership before you start any kind of actions to improve the community. Not having support from the project could not only lead to the changes being ineffective, but they could also really be disruptive and even damaging to the people on the project. The Introduction Practitioner Guide has tons more details and is designed to get you thinking about what you might want to measure, along with how to measure it, with some general tips and cautions. And it's meant to complement the guides in the rest of the series, which we'll talk about more throughout the rest of this presentation, starting with responsiveness. So in this section, I'll cover each of the practitioner topics one by one, starting with responsiveness. And it's important for projects to respond to contributions in a timely manner, because a quick response can help you retain contributors who otherwise might become discouraged if they just don't hear anything back. Timely, thoughtful, and kind responses to contributors indicate that you actually appreciate their work. And being responsive to contributions from other people helps grow the community and helps you improve contributor sustainability, which I'll talk about in just a couple of minutes. And while quick responses are important, it is also important to keep up with change requests, especially so like pull requests, merge requests, and resolve them in a timely manner, even if the response is closing things that are they're just never going to get merged. It is really easy to get behind on incoming contributions, and we all get behind sometimes, but not addressing these contributions promptly really just creates technical debt, and it reduces the chances that they'll ever be merged, because those old crusty change requests are just going to have too many merge conflicts anyways, that they become too difficult to accept. So it's better to bite the bullet and close them sooner rather than later. Now, it can be really tempting to solve issues with responsiveness by just putting more pressure on your existing maintainers and asking them to respond more quickly and resolve more contributions. But this rarely actually solves any of the long-term problems, and it might result in short-term gains, true, but it could also be damaging to the community and the project over time if all you're doing is burning out your maintainers by not resolving the underlying problems that are causing the issues in the first place. So if you see responsiveness declining, there are a few things you might do. So first, it can help to set expectations and just help contributors understand when it might be likely that they would actually expect a response. It might also be time to move some contributors into leadership roles and to promote some trusted contributors to become maintainers for your project, which I'll talk more about on the next slide. And finally, you might also want to create or improve your issue and change request templates to make it easier for people to make higher quality submissions in the first place that require less work from the maintainers. And the responsiveness practitioner guide, which is linked on this slide, has a bunch of other details about ways to improve responsiveness. And these slides have already been sent to the Fosback Sage team, and they're posted on my website, but I'll post a link on the socials as well. Contributor sustainability is a really important part of assessing whether an open source project and a community actually has enough contributors for the project to be sustained over the long term. So contributor sustainability has a pretty big impact on overall project sustainability. And let's face it, many projects struggle to find enough people to actively participate in their projects and then to continue to maintain them over the long term. And the reality is there are just a lot of open source projects and not enough contributors. So maintainers are in desperate need for help across the various types of contributions needed to have successful, secure, and sustainable open source projects. It's important to think about how to better utilize your existing maintainers while also looking at barriers to contribution that might be preventing participation from potential new contributors. If there are not enough contributors to sustain the project, then this increases the risk that the project will fail, which creates a whole variety of issues for users and contributors. Now, there are a couple of things that measuring contributor sustainability can tell you. First of all, how big of an issue is your current contributor situation? If it's like this one, you really should focus on getting a few more people other than that one person in green here. But you might also find that there are people who are contributing more than you realized, which can help you think about who you could encourage to contribute more, or possibly someone who could move into a maintainer role or some other type of leadership role. And reaching out to someone and acknowledging their work while encouraging them to do more can actually do quite a bit of help with growing your contributor base. Sometimes people just need a little bit of encouragement, and you can ask them for specific things that you know that they're good at. And there are several communities I've gotten more involved in because someone asked me for my specific help with something. Now, the catch here, and with many metrics, is that we don't want to just think about the people who are making commits or code contributions. It's a good start, but we should also be thinking about how you can move people into leadership positions to be responsible for the things that might not show up in your existing data, like documentation, community management, marketing, program management, product management, and loads of other important roles. These activities really do take up valuable time from maintainers. And someone with actual expertise in some of these roles can sometimes help offload the maintainer and really make the project overall more sustainable. And it's also important to look at your contribution guides and other onboarding documentation to make sure that new contributors can easily get started with your project. Good documentation is how we scale all of the things that take up precious time from our maintainers and other contributors and free up their time to work on other things. If things are well documented, new contributors can get started with a minimal amount of help from the existing maintainers, which can save you a lot of time in the long run and reduce frustration for the maintainers who get really tired of answering those same onboarding questions over and over and over. And again, the practitioner guide linked on the slide has a lot more tips and details. Now, relicensing came up earlier. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and it relates really directly to organizational participation, which we don't spend enough time thinking about and really does impact the sustainability of open source projects. So you should really look at organizational diversity as part of the health and risk for open source projects. If all or most of the contributions come from people at a single company, what happens when that company has a shift in strategy or gets acquired or runs out of money and just goes out of business? Would the project be able to continue if that company pulled all of its employees out of the project? And these single vendor open source projects might not seem risky, but they can quickly become unviable after a licensing change or when everyone just stops working on the project. If most of the work is being done by the people at a single organization, the project might be riskier to use and harder to contribute to than a project with contributions that are spread out over many organizations without any single organization being dominant. The biggest challenge with identifying trends for organizations and open source projects is that the organizational affiliation data is almost never accurate enough to use without doing a bunch of manual cleanups. And this is described in more detail in the practitioner guide. Improving organizational participation depends a lot on whether you work for that dominant organization or not. So if you work for the dominant organization, you can focus on getting contributors from maybe some other organizations or customers that you have relationships with that you know are using the project and might be interested in contributing. It's also probably important to improve transparency. In a lot of cases with these organizational projects, a lot of the work is happening behind closed doors, and moving that work out into the open makes it easier for people from other organizations to contribute. Now, this might actually require training for your staff on how to work in the open, because this isn't something that every corporate developer knows how to do. Now, if you don't work for that dominant organization, you can encourage your employees to contribute to a project by giving them time during work to make contributions. And again, this is all described in more detail in the practitioner guide. Now, the newest guide in this series is about security. I will again just reiterate that these are really getting started practitioner guides. So this is not a comprehensive security guide, but it's a way to get started. It really is important to think about security and its impact on project sustainability really from the beginning of the project. One thing I look for when I'm looking at sustainability for an open source project is whether they make regular releases and quickly patch security vulnerabilities. In addition to just looking at the project itself, it's also really important to look at the dependencies that that project has. And we have a lib-year metric that can help you see whether a project keeps their dependencies up to date, since outdated dependencies can be a pretty big security risk. And people just tend not to trust projects with unpatched security vulnerabilities, and they're more likely to adopt projects that they trust to be more secure. So in short, projects that take a proactive approach to having a security policy, addressing security issues, and releasing fixes are going to be more sustainable over the long term. Now, one of the best places to start when improving your security practices is actually by securing your code repository. So that's kind of step one. And this includes things like managing access, branch protection, contributor access, things like that. Another really good starting point is creating a detailed security policy, usually in a security.md file. The purpose of this document is to provide instructions for how people can privately report security vulnerabilities, along with documenting how you respond to those reports, including managing embargoes with the people who use your software. Now, dependencies require a pretty thoughtful approach with testing to make sure that you aren't breaking something else when updating a critical dependency. And there are indeed actually good reasons to avoid updating certain dependencies for maybe a shorter period of time. But in most cases, dependencies aren't updated because people just don't realize that they need to be updated, because it can be difficult to keep track of such things. But we have tools for that, right? We have tools like Dependabot that can help identify and automatically update certain types of dependencies. It's also important to make sure that your security fixes land in a release in a timely fashion. So if you make security patches often, but don't actually get them into a release quickly where people can use them, then you should probably look at why this happens and see if you can improve your release process to make more frequent releases with vulnerabilities. Now, a lot of these improvements are pretty well documented in the OpenSSF best practices badge criteria. So even if you don't ever intend to apply for the badge, the working your way through that OpenSSF best practices badge criteria is a really good way to make not just security improvements, but overall engineering improvements for your project. And as always, the Security Practitioner Guide has a few more details and links. This is I think our last slide. Building sustainable open source projects over the long term can be a challenge, right? Project leaders and contributors are busy people who don't always have time to focus on growing a community and maintaining their software along with all of their other many commitments. Using metrics is one way to help open source projects identify potential issues and areas where they can improve their project to make it more sustainable over the long term. Being proactive about improving sustainability before it becomes a crisis can help make our software more sustainable and reliable for all of us. With that, I will say thank you, and hopefully we have time for some questions. Yes, okay. Questions? No questions. Yes. Go back there. Do they just talk? Like, are these microphones live?
Yes, because the microphones are already set up.
Okay.
Thank you for your talk. I worked with another community. I worked for Wikipedia, so I worked with the Wikipedia community. And I was wondering, when talking about healthy community, did you also look at community life cycles? If there's anything, even if you have a healthy community, if there's a natural life cycle that at some point the community might have grown too old, or a young community dies rather quickly. Did you also look at that when looking at community health?
Yeah, so I think that's covered in the introduction guide, because I think all of that is part of interpreting the metrics in light of all of the things that are going on within your project. So a project that has maybe just started will have very different dynamics and characteristics, and they'll care about different things and they'll have different goals than a project that has been around for a very long time, is very mature, and is, you know, maybe in maintenance mode. So I think it's one of the things that you have to think about when you're deciding what you need to do with your community and what the metrics mean, like, for your particular community. Does that make sense? Did you have anything to add to that, Peculiar?
Got it all right.
Okay, next question.
You mentioned Dependabot as a way to increase velocity, I think, but I worry about automated tools because they sort of take the human out of it, and oftentimes these things that like Dependabot are doing, they should be looked at by humans. And I wonder if it's not papering over other problems by being more responsive.
Yes, so I would say that the advantage of Dependabot is that it raises awareness of which things might need to be updated. But I am also very reluctant to just turn things over to the bots. There might be certain types of dependencies that you could just let something like a Dependabot trust it to update. But there are other dependencies that frankly are just too complex. They're too tightly integrated into your code base. They're something that a human needs to look at and run some tests on and decide whether it makes sense. So the advantage of using Dependabot, I think, is for awareness, but I don't think that you should cut the human out of the loop with the bots. I think Ruth was next.
Yeah, you mentioned about no code contributions and things like that. How does that kind of get tracked in this kind of information?
In the metrics, you mean?
Yeah, because that's something that's quite tricky. I know it's probably it depends and it's quite hard, but yeah, just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Peculiar?
No code contribution?
Yeah.
I get the question correct.
Yeah, and how to track those.
How to track them. Okay, one awesome thing we did at Chaos is in our Chaos website or community repository, we created a way to track what's non-code contributions, and we made it available to the community that anyone, for whatever contribution you made at Chaos that is not anything that has to do with code, you have a way to add it up, document it on that repository. So this way we're able to track all the contributions different individuals are making in the community. So for non-code contributions in your community, such are things that you might need to do, find a way, create a way for them to add all the other contributions, whatever it means, how little it is, to record all of them. And sometimes we find out that people don't usually remember to record it because of one reason or the other. So what we do in our working groups, we keep on emphasizing and reminding them and encourage different leaders that are leading different working groups to encourage their members to document in our repository all their non-code contributions. So that way we're able to track all the non-code contributions other people make.
Yeah, and if you look at, projects like Kubernetes, for example, I was involved there for a while, and really everything gets done in GitHub issues. So event organization, community management, comms, really they try to do as much of that as possible through GitHub so that things do get tracked. But it depends a lot on your individual community, right? Some communities don't have a good way to do this or don't have a culture of people remembering to do that. And so I think in a lot of cases, as with many things in open source projects, a lot of times it comes down to people watching and seeing what people are doing and recognizing them for that. Because I do think that promoting people into leadership positions to be responsible for other bits of the project, so being having someone who's like your communications maintainer or your community maintainer or your documentation maintainer, having these people in positions of leadership can really help offload the maintainers with, frankly, for things that in general, a lot of maintainers don't really want to be doing in the first place. They'd rather have someone else just deal with it. And so, but sometimes it does really require you kind of noticing these people doing things. So it's helpful to keep an eye out for people that are working on things in the community that might not be recognized or might not be noticed or might not show up in the metrics.